Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
More and more of us are connected to caregiving, especially as our parents get older, but also if you have a spouse that becomes ill, you become the caregiver. So a lot goes on with that, mentally, physically, financially, but also in the mix is resentment. Many things that you can feel resentment toward. Why am I in this situation? Maybe resentment toward the person you're giving care to. Maybe they don't appreciate it like you think they should. All the other stuff that comes in there. We're going to talk about that today and how to navigate through that feeling of resentment. And she's going to help. She's our professional of the year. Don't know anybody like her that is a coach for caregiving. Marika Humphreys is back on the program. Welcome. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well, Steve. Yes, and I want to say that we're going to try and talk about this topic with a little levity because it is kind of a heavy topic, but doesn't mean we have to treat it so heavy. So, yes, feeling of resentment.
And it can weigh heavy on you, just like not getting enough sleep because you're taking care of somebody. I think it's just as important as all the other things, all the other emotions or feelings that one has as a caregiver.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is one of the things that I think is the biggest takeaway is, and we've talked off and on about emotions as caregiving, as a caregiver. It's another one to just be really aware of. And it can sometimes feel like bitterness, or sometimes maybe you're feeling stuck or obligated, like I have to do this, there's no one else to do it, or other people aren't doing their share. All of those are very similar feelings that that I kind of call resentment. But I think they're all similar and related feelings. And when you want to be, I think the first takeaway is that if you notice yourself feeling that, or maybe you've been feeling it for a long time, you've got to pay attention. I always like to think of emotions as messengers. They just are here to tell us something is that we need to pay attention to in our life. And that is a big one, because when we stay stuck in it, you will just get more and more miserable and you won't get towards any sort of resolution. So yeah, it's one of those that you want to really notice: bitterness, obligation.
How do you avoid what my friends like to call going down the suck hole? Like you're just, you just get
Yeah.
dive deep into that as you feel yourself feeling that resentment.
Yeah. One of the ways as a coach and in life coaching, one of the things we focus on is how to empower people in their lives. How do you get power back in your life? And one of the ways that all human beings can do that is through the decisions we make. And sometimes it's committing to or taking ownership for decisions we've already made, or it's making a new decision. And where that comes back to is a lot of times in caregiving, and this is why I like to bring it up specifically around caregiving, because a lot of times we fall into the role of caregiver, whether that's for aging parents or other family members, or for our spouse, like the people that I tend to focus on. It's not something that we like, we're expecting, even with aging parents. I mean, many of us know, yes, that's probably something we'll do, but it's not one of those roles that we're, dying to do, of course. But so we fall into that role. And I think that is where over time, when we haven't found a way to balance our own needs with our responsibilities as a caregiver, or we haven't really been honest with ourselves about how, who we want to be as a caregiver, like we tend to fall into those roles. And I will give you some examples. I think in my own story, there was just a period of time. It was fairly short overall, where my husband was battling cancer, and there was a period of time where his health was really declining, and I felt more like his nurse. I would say, thankfully for me overall, that was a very small period of time. I'm thinking like kind of weeks where it was very intense. And I remember a coworker said, "How's your relationship?" My automatic thought was, "What relationship? I'm just his nurse." And I realized in that
Mm.
moment when I don't know if I said it out loud or not. I think I did actually. And I kind of realized in that moment that, ooh, I'm bitter. I'm bitter about that. I didn't want to be, it was kind of like this ugliness that came up from me. And and so I think that's first of all a good example. Like sometimes we just recognize, you want to recognize like, oh, there's some feeling going on there. Maybe it's your mother that you're taking care of, and you recognize like, you just it feels like dread to go over
Mm.
there or whatever. So recognizing that, one of the first, what I recommend people do, and one of the things that I had to do myself, but I think this is really useful for all caregivers, is because we tend to fall into that role, you want to ask yourself again, and maybe frequently, maybe once every 6 months, like, do I want to care for this person? And I say, really honestly ask yourself that. Do
Mm.
I want to provide, and another way to think about that is, do I want to provide some form of care for this person? Because I think we tend to, when we build up resentment, it's because of the way our caregiving is looking. It is not that we don't want to care most of the time. I think there are certainly some relationships where it was never a good relationship in the beginning, but even then, you want to just ask yourself that question, because a lot of times the answer is yes, but I don't want it to be this way, or yes, but I need more help. Yes, but I need more time.
What if, okay, and I've got that. What if it's the only choice? What if
Ah,
let's say insurance company won't provide in-home help. And now it's on your shoulders. And yeah, you're good taking care of them, but like you need a break, you don't want to do it full time, whatever the scenario is. How do you get around that one?
yeah. Well, first of all, I would argue that we always have a choice. When we back ourselves into this corner of there's only one way,
Mm.
we will always feel like it's a disempowering, well, right? We'll always feel like a victim. And I use this example, and it is extreme, but sometimes you need to give your brain options. You don't have to care for, like, let's say it's your mother or your spouse. I tell people, I don't, I shouldn't say this. This sounds kind of bad, but people have the option of leaving their spouse, even when their spouse is sick. People do that because they recognize, like, oh, my marriage was already unhappy and now they're, sick, and like I'm just more miserable. You can leave. You may think you're a horrible person. That's all aside. That's still an option. Let's say it's your parent, a parent that you love. You don't have to, even if there are no other choices. The choice, you still have that choice. Now, for most people, let's just assume most people, and I do believe this, where most people are caring. That's why you want to ask that question to yourself, is probably like, yes, I really do love my mother. Yes, we've had hard times, but I do want her to have some care. I don't want her to be destitute and nobody caring for her. But I don't, there's no other resources. I don't want to do it full time. I need some breaks, all the things. But I'm making kind of a big deal about this because it is really important to just to recognize that you always still
Mm.
have a choice. Even if you don't think those are good choices, there's still choices.
Just
And
knowing
that's
you
how we
have it,
feel.
just knowing you have it,
Yeah,
even though you
right.
might not pull the emergency chute,
Yeah,
you
exactly.
know?
I mean, it's surprisingly really important for us to have that. Like again, I coach people who are caring for their partner or spouse, and
Mm.
I say, whatever your beliefs are about divorce, I say, like, you need to have that as an option just so that you don't feel stuck. Because as long as we're feeling stuck, and here's the whole reason why I'm giving this extreme example. When you feel stuck, you're just going to stay kind of focused on the problem. I'm stuck and there's no options.
Yeah.
And where you want to get your brain focused, again, this is where the power of we have as humans is to make decisions or make new decisions and to problem solve. So you want to get your brain focused on how can I do this and have more time or and have help or have some balance in my life, or you want to get to like, how do I make this so that it is livable and that I'm not feeling resentful? That's the better question to ask. But when we're stuck in resentment and we don't really get to that point, we'll just stay miserable and we won't ever get to the point of problem solving for the type of caregiving you're doing that doesn't allow you. Usually it's some form of balance or time or energy or whatever. I mean, that's usually when we start to feel resentment, is because we're not taking care of our own needs.
Yep.
And we feel we have to be there for them. We're the only ones. That is where the thinking just doesn't help us.
So, and thank you for bringing that up, because I believe in the mindset, just knowing that you have an out makes it more doable. I'm just keep doing what I'm doing, but I know in case I can pull the cord.
Yeah, you have a choice, right? You always have a choice. And I think then you want to say, okay, if I really do want to provide some form of care because there is no one else, or I have siblings and they won't help, or because that's a lot of people, right? A lot of people feel, I've had clients who have adult children who feel like, their adult children should be helping care for their parent, and they aren't, so that those types of feelings are really common in caregiving. So that's where getting really clear with your own intent, because we can't control all those other people. We can certainly ask, we can make very clear requests, but ultimately we've just got to figure out the kind of caregiver we want to be and what's doable for us. And then when we have clarity there, then you can start figuring out, okay, how do I fill the gaps? I just don't have, I'm working full time and I only have 5 extra hours a week, but my mother needs more care than that. How can I fill in the gaps? And those answers aren't easy, but they're out there. People, we can be incredibly resourceful when we start setting our mind to solving a problem versus just focusing on the feeling of, of how we're stuck. And that's my whole point here, is like when we're feeling resentment and bitterness and stuckness, we aren't creating a better solution for ourselves. We're just staying miserable, and it's understandable. It's just not where you want to stay.
What about, I'm going to flip this around another way, feeling resentment for decisions that you made? May have been a medical decision or whatever it might be. Now you're resenting your decision. How do you get past one of those?
So one of the things, I think we've talked about decisions a little bit before, but one of the things is when we judge our past decisions, we're always doing it from a future place, right? The place of knowing more, seeing how something turned out, having more information. And we can, so anytime we have any sort of judgment about, that was a bad decision, it was a wrong decision, it was a poor decision, we're looking at it in hindsight. We're looking at it with how we know things turned out. And again, doing that is it's just not a useful way to spend our energy. So feeling resentment about a decision we made is just not a useful way to spend energy. So again, it's just I think the best way to get out of that is asking yourself, what can I learn from this? Or that may not have turned out well, or the way I liked it, or I wasn't thinking clearly when I made that decision. Or now look what I have to do because of that decision. Like I didn't see all the consequences. So what can I learn? And sometimes maybe I want to maybe you can make a new decision. I mean, I think we don't think about that enough. Like we just often live out the effects of our past decisions without thinking, what about a new decision? I mean, you can do that in relationships, like with all sorts of things. We do so much of our lives out of habit, and when the emotions come up is when you really want to evaluate. You want to look at all the things you're doing afresh and say, okay, what can I do differently instead of just going out of habit? So I don't know if that answers the answer to the question. Like, I
Are there exercises we can do? Like, for example, I try to, as much as possible, keep a gratitude journal. I just every
yeah,
day I write down 3 things. That's it.
yeah,
Put the date I
yeah.
am grateful for. Things like that. Are there things that we can do to get us out of the potential resentment funk?
Yes. I think one of the best ways to do that is to decide what kind of caregiver you want to be.
Hmm.
And it's kind of, I call it like creating a role for yourself because again, most of us fall into caregiving. We don't give it much thought beforehand. And what tends to happen is we sort of just, most people rise to the challenge and, a need comes up and they do it. And you sort of end up just, a lot of times you end up trying to do too much all over the place. You don't have any limits or boundaries. And that is where I think just asking yourself, what kind of caregiver do I want to be? And giving yourself some boundaries because no one's going to do that for you. I mean, if sometimes your loved one may have like endless requests, they may want endless care from you. But it's you who's got to create those limits for yourself, for your own sanity, right? And who you want to be. Like, I want to be caring and loving towards my mother, who I'm caring for, let's say. But if I am exhausted and I have no time for myself and I don't have a social life, it's going to be really hard to be caring and loving towards her because I don't have any life for myself. So when I talk about like really asking yourself, who do I want to be? And then what do I need to do that? And those are journal questions. I mean, I really think like just the same way you would journal what you're grateful for, who do I want to be? And you can make it simple, like, who do I want to be today? I want to be, you know, appreciative or caring, or I want to focus on their strengths, you can make it simple, but that's a really good question because most of us, I think, know, but we don't remind ourselves. It's kind of a way of reminding yourself of your own values. It's another way, really, of getting in touch with what you value, and then recognizing this is what I need in order to stay in alignment with my values. I need to have a good night's rest. Like this is one of the exercises I do often with my clients is like, what do you need? What is most important to you or right now? And then what do you need in order to be that or to have that? Usually it's some form of rest or a break or time or whatever, in order to do that. So those are questions to ask. I think those are great questions, especially as caregiving when we're so focused on another person.
Is it reasonable to think if you're writing this stuff down, journaling, it's almost like you're creating a job description for myself. How does this going to
Yeah,
look? Even if you're already doing it. All right,
I
let's get
yes.
organized here. What's this job entail?
I think of it exactly like that. That I have an exercise I lead my clients through, call it, and I call it create a role for yourself. And I use the comparison of a job. Like when we get a job, there's a job description, and we know we know what's required of us. And in caregiving, that doesn't happen. So you have to do that for yourself. And I think the
Hmm.
power of doing that for yourself is that job is going to look different for everybody. And so you want to know, like, how you create the job for yourself is going to be based on what other responsibilities you have, how much time you have, how much finances you have. I mean, it's going to be a very individual job, and it should be, and that's okay. But it also should have some limits and some constraints because it's not just a do everything job. That is when people burn out and then end up feeling bitter and resentful.
And that's what I'm going at is you create the job description, and then in the other column, maybe things that you don't really want to do or think that you should do because others can. For example, I'm the primary caregiver. It's all here for whoever. Call
Yeah.
spouse, father, whatever. And this column, oh, wait a minute. I've got a relative that's connected to the person I'm caring for that can drive them to rehab twice a week, then I don't have to do that. I'm putting that over on that column and things similar to that.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Because then you start thinking, okay, these are the things that I want to do or I'm willing to do or have time for. And these are the things that I don't either want to do. Because then you're problem solving, right? Then you're figuring out, okay, these are my resources. Your brain is in a whole different mode of, and there are lots of volunteer organizations that help people for free. They're volunteers, right? I mean, those are just Google searches. Some are close to certain areas, some are national groups, but that's just an option. But yes, family members, friends, but the minute you start creating some limits, then you can see what's outside of those limits and how do you get those needs taken care of. And you could simply start with like, yeah, what are all the needs? What am I willing to do or have time to do? And then what can I delegate or have someone else take care of? And again, I like to caution with family members. I mean, it is not a unique situation to have multiple siblings and they all don't care for, the parent evenly or again, a spouse and adult children and the children don't help. And, so that's not at all uncommon and can lead to a lot of resentment when you don't really when you aren't kind of aware of those feelings. And I mean, when it comes down to it, like we can ask all day long, we can't make other people do things. And so that was a whole nother, we'll save that for another day, but
For sure.
but it helps by limiting your own role, right? That's when you're going to feel the best, is when you decide, okay, I'm taking charge. This is what I'm willing to do. And I'm going to figure out some way through all the resources that I can think of to get these other things done.
Wow.
Oh, yeah, I love it.
It's a big thing. And I believe that many of us minimize the strength of writing it down. We're just like, I don't have time for that. I know what I got to do. No, you do, but you don't, because the power, and it's been scientifically proven how when you write it down, it makes that hand and mind connection and solidifies it. It's science.
Yeah, yeah, it is. And I think even spending time just doing this and putting it on paper, it forces you to get clarity for one. And that is, I think, the act of writing down. I mean, why I think that works is because the minute you put a thought into words, you now have to make it clear in some way. You have to give it shape and you give it form, and now you can read it back to yourself. So there is a lot of power in writing things down. And the other point that I think is also is don't undervalue the things that you are doing as a caregiver too. Like a lot of those things, you may not think about them like it's no big deal, but there is a lot that goes into probably many of the things you do as a caregiver that is important to give yourself credit for as well. Like, maybe it's just companionship or something that you offer. I mean, those are things I think sometimes we don't really recognize all the things we do as a caregiver. And you want to just take note of those things. I mean, you might actually realize that there's many things you probably enjoy doing or don't mind doing,
Right.
and those are, again, that's the value of writing it down. Like you get to see both sides, right? It's probably for most people, it's probably not all terrible if they're feeling resentment or bitterness. There's probably a lot of things they enjoy or give them satisfaction or, something like that as well. So I think it's just super helpful to do.
And clarity. Once you have it in front of you, now you're getting some clarity on the whole thing, where it can be just the ping pong ball in your head, bing, 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 back and forth. It's like, oh, I know I got to do this, but then I got to do that. Now it's in front of you, and now you can identify maybe somebody else can do those duties, and not that you're walking away from it, but maybe would minimize your resentment because now it's clear.
Yeah, and you determine, again, that's where we have power in our lives is the decisions we make. So you start with this is the kind of care, this is the what caregiving I'm able to do or want to do. When you start there, then you can move out. Maybe there's other things you take on that you don't really want to do, but it gives you a starting point. And that is, again, when you goes, it will take you from feeling like a victim and feeling obligated and stuck, bitter, to recognizing I do have control over this, and maybe there's some things I don't have control over, but I'm willing to take on some of those things because I at least know these are the things, and maybe you have to make some tough decisions, but what is the most important to you? I really need to have Friday night with my friends. That is like one thing that just I need to do, and I'm willing to do all these other things, but you have to make those decisions. Those are decisions we make. And when you make them, that's when we feel like, okay, I have control. And you can like, I like to tell people, do this every 6 months, because things change. Situations change. You might change. All of it changes. So it's something you can always reevaluate too.
Sure. And don't feel guilty about making those choices. It's okay. And then we've talked about that guilt in a previous episode. How do we find you, Marika?
Yes, my website is the best place, coachmarika.com. So that's Marika. So coachmarika.com. And on there, you will find a way to connect with me. You'll find some of my blog or my podcast episodes. And you can get in touch with me there.
There is help. There are resources and people to walk that journey with you if you're going through it and you're that person. Again, I don't know anybody else that is a coach for caregiving. Many times you don't expect to be in that position, and we need somebody to walk that journey with us. So thank you for what you do. Thank you for being our professional of the year and for being here.
You are welcome, Steve. Yes, I will help you write your caregiving job description like we just talked about.
Yes. All right. We'll talk soon.
All right. Thanks, Steve. Bye-bye.
Are you looking for even more of the podcasts and hosts that you love? The Podcast Business News Network is proud to announce that you now have even more ways to listen live. Check out the MyTuner Radio, online radio box, and Simple Radio apps on iOS and Android, or find us online. Search for Business News Network on mytuner-radio.com, or search Podcast Business News Network on streama.com and onlineradiobox.com/US. Take your podcast on the go and don't miss a minute of the action.
Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
For nearly 2,000 severely injured veterans, everyday life has become filled with barriers.
Day-to-day simple tasks can become pretty daunting.
I have to carry my chair up 2 flights of steps or have somebody do it for me.
What scares me the most is just the falling.
When I'm struggling with my house, I think, to have that one great barrier just knocked down, it's crucial.
Home for Our Troops is a wonderful nonprofit that builds a
mortgage-free, fully adaptive, handicap-accessible house. And there's no catch.
It'll be our very first home that we've ever owned.
This is a game changer.
This is where your life begins again.
We need you to join us in completing this important mission. Please visit hfotusa.org and help build homes and rebuild lives.
Because of you, everything's going to be okay.